The flagship of the Human Federation, Nova Horizon, glided silently through deep space. As the crew finished preparations to halt the genocide crisis erupting at the edge of the galaxy, tension filled the air aboard the ship. The mission was simple: stop the genocide, save the innocents, and restore peace to the galaxy. But behind every seemingly simple task lay greater dangers, especially considering they faced the ruthless warlord Kareth. Commander Elias Varro stood tall at the center of the bridge, his eyes scanning the reports flashing across the large screens. The images coming from Revelus were horrifying. Vast cities reduced to rubble, innocent people wiped out. Kareth's army had mercilessly attacked the native population of Revelus, unleashing destruction with their death-dealing machines. "Commander Varro," Lieutenant Arden Brooks said, approaching him, "we're approaching orbit. The first reconnaissance team is ready to deploy." Varro took a deep breath and nodded. Brooks was known for his calm demeanor and strategic mind. He brought level-headedness to the heat of battle, but Varro knew this mission was no ordinary conflict. The fate of the galaxy would be shaped by the decisions made here. As Revelus' surface appeared on the screens, it was clear that the planet had once been vibrant and beautiful. Now, however, all that remained were ruins, charred forests, and abandoned streets. Kareth's massive war machines patrolled the distance, waiting for their next target. "What's the status of the first contact team?" Varro asked without taking his eyes off the screen. "We've prepared the unit led by Corporal Kira O'Donnell," Brooks replied. "She's known for her warrior spirit. If we encounter resistance, O'Donnell and her team will be our first line of defense." Varro nodded and left the bridge, heading toward the cargo bay. As he walked through the metallic corridors of the ship, the crew's silent but tense preparations were palpable. Soldiers were donning their armor and doing final checks on their weapons. When he arrived at the cargo bay, O'Donnell and her team were ready for deployment. There was a fire in O'Donnell's eyes. Though the mission would push her to the limit, she was always one to prefer the heat of battle. "Commander," O'Donnell said as she approached Varro, "we're ready." "This isn't just any battle, Kira," Varro said. "What's at stake here is saving the innocent and maintaining the balance of the galaxy. We must not underestimate Kareth."
O'Donnell nodded firmly.
"Just give the order, Commander." After a brief pause, Varro said, "Begin the descent." As the ship's doors slowly opened, the cold, dark expanse of space revealed the shattered surface of Revelus in all its stark reality. O'Donnell and her team quickly boarded the drop pods and descended through the atmosphere, their craft surrounded by flames as they sped toward the planet. Despite the intensity of the re-entry, all pods landed smoothly in the ruined streets of Revelus. Varro watched every moment of the descent from the ship's screens. Then he turned to Brooks. "Get a status report." Brooks swiftly activated his comms. "O'Donnell, what's your status?" Her voice crackled through the static. "We've landed successfully, but the atmosphere is thick. Moving through the wreckage will be difficult." As Varro gazed at the landscape of Revelus, he took a deep breath. His eyes focused on the distant war machines. He knew the resistance O'Donnell would face would be fiercer than they had anticipated. O'Donnell and her team carefully navigated through the debris. The air was heavy, and the dust seemed to cling to every step they took. Suddenly, a massive shadow appeared ahead. It was one of Kareth's patrolling war machines, quad-legged, heavily armored, and armed with laser cannons. "We can't lose communication," O'Donnell said, gripping her radio. "We're making first contact. We may need support." Just then, the machine moved, its massive legs grinding against the ground as it turned toward them. The deep metallic sound filled their ears. One of the soldiers shouted, "It's coming this way." O'Donnell made a quick decision. "Take cover," she commanded. The team darted behind the remains of nearby walls. The massive war machine aimed its laser cannons, and the moment of tension hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, a deafening explosion echoed across the ruins. The machine had locked onto its target, demolishing a crumbling building in the process. O'Donnell glanced at her soldiers. "We need to bring this thing down. Prepare the explosives." The team moved quickly, placing charges at the machine's weak points. As it readied for another attack, O'Donnell raised her radio. "Blow it!" Within a second, the explosives detonated, causing a massive explosion beneath the machine. One of its legs was blown completely off, and it collapsed to the ground with a heavy crash. As it fell, O'Donnell and her team retreated to a safe distance. But this was only the beginning. From the underground bunkers of Revelus, more of Caratha's war machines and soldiers began to emerge. O'Donnell turned to her team. "This isn't over yet," she said. "Hold your positions. A bigger wave is coming." Under the dark skies of Revelus, amidst the ruins, the first battle for galactic justice had begun. Amidst the ruins of Revelus, the flames of war grew even higher. O'Donnell and his team had destroyed a massive war machine, but now they faced Caratha's army. They had repelled the initial assault, but that was only a vanguard force. The massive shadow looming on the horizon signaled the arrival of Caratha's main force. This would be the greatest challenge the Galactic Peace Force had ever faced. Varro and the crew aboard the ship watched this horror unfold from above. The screens showed Caratha's enormous army advancing across the wrecked surface of Revelus. Varro, feeling the weight of the situation, stood calmly in the center of the bridge. "Lieutenant Brooks," Varro said, eyes fixed on the screen, "we need to strengthen the defense lines of our frontline troops. Send in the support teams." Brooks acted immediately, opening the comms to relay new orders. "O'Donnell, a massive army is approaching. Reinforcements are on their way, but you'll have to hold the line alone for a while." O'Donnell's voice came through clearly on the radio. "Understood, Commander. We'll reinforce our defense positions. We're ready for Caratha's army." Among the ruins, O'Donnell and his team knew they could be attacked at any moment. Explosives were rearmed, laser cannons were positioned, and soldiers remained on high alert. Every breath felt like the start of a colossal battle. As the shadow on the horizon drew closer, the details of Caratha's massive army became clearer. His forces were an unholy fusion of ancient war machines and giant armored beasts, accompanied by technological death machines. Hovering drones and heavy tanks moved steadily through the rough terrain of Revelus. O'Donnell raised his binoculars to his eyes, surveying the approaching enemy. This is like nothing we've ever seen," he said to the soldier next to him. "I've never encountered such a powerful force, not even in the darkest corners of the galaxy." The soldiers, checking their explosives and defense weapons, moved quickly at O'Donnell's command. "Take your positions," O'Donnell shouted. As everyone took their places, the tension reached its peak. Caratha's army, now fully arrived on the battlefield, halted as if waiting for something. Then a massive figure emerged, Carath himself. His armor gleamed, radiating fear. Just as Varro had suspected, Carath wasn't just a warlord. He was a war god, every step he took shaking the ground beneath him. Watching this scene from the ship, Varro frowned. "How did he mobilize such a massive force so quickly?" he muttered to himself. "This is going to be much harder than we thought." Carath stepped forward, and with that, the battle exploded into chaos. Caratha's armored units launched a brutal assault on O'Donnell's positions. Explosions rocked the battlefield. Laser cannons unleashed deadly beams of light, yet Caratha's forces pressed on relentlessly. O'Donnell moved swiftly from position to position, issuing orders to his troops. "Stay sharp. This is just the first wave. More could follow." As the intensity of the battle increased, both sides began taking losses. But Caratha's army, using their superior technology, kept pushing forward. O'Donnell and his team were starting to struggle in their trenches. Dust and smoke filled the air, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Suddenly, a massive creature appeared before O'Donnell. It was fully armored, with 4 arms, sharp teeth, and glowing eyes that radiated death. This beast was more dangerous than any war machine. O'Donnell quickly drew his weapon and fired, but the bullets bounced off the creature's armor. As it raised a giant sword, preparing to strike, one of O'Donnell's soldiers rushed forward, attaching an explosive device to the creature's armor. "Detonate the explosive."
O'Donnell shot.
The explosion rocked the battlefield, and the creature collapsed to the ground with a thunderous crash. But the victory was short-lived, as more creatures and war machines surged towards them. O'Donnell paused for a moment, then grabbed his radio and called out to Varro. "Commander, we need reinforcements now." Varro, watching the dire situation unfold from the ship, knew he had to make a quick decision. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said with firm resolve, "activate all the ship's defense systems and send the reinforcements to Revelus. We can't wait any longer." Brooks nodded and swiftly carried out the orders. "Defense shields are active. Reinforcement team is en route." From the ship's lower bay, a new team descended. These reinforcements were outfitted with heavier armor and more powerful weapons. Varro had made the move that could change the tide of battle. But even so, the enemy they faced was too cunning to be defeated by brute force alone. O'Donnell, watching the reinforcements arrive, felt a moment of relief. This was the critical point of the battle. Caratha's army was on the verge of breaking through the defense line. Brutal skirmishes erupted amidst the ruins. Both sides suffered heavy losses, but no one considered retreat. Only the smoke and echoes of explosions remained from the battle on the ravaged surface of Revelus. The conflict between Caratha's forces and the Galactic Peace Corps had turned the ruins of Revelus into a war zone. O'Donnell and his team had momentarily caught their breath with the arrival of reinforcements, but Caratha's main forces were still attacking with full power. The battle had become personal. Carath had sworn to conquer this galaxy with his own hands, and no one seemed capable of breaking his iron will. As the sky darkened and the war raged on, Carath reappeared in his massive armor. His sword glowed like a plasma flame, cutting through everything in its path. The troops around him moved swiftly at his command, relentlessly pushing the defense line. Behind Carath, waves of heavily armored war machines and deadly creatures launched an overwhelming assault. O'Donnell's defensive line was on the verge of total collapse. O'Donnell wiped the sweat from his face with his sleeve. "We have to stop this monster," he said to the soldiers beside him. "We know Carath is preparing for one final attack. If we can't stop him here, there's no point in returning to the Federation." The lieutenant beside him held up a bag full of explosives. "If we can plant these explosives on Caratha's armor, we can take him down." O'Donnell nodded. "I'll handle this. The rest of you hold the line. We'll use everything we have to stop Carath." Carath was more than just a great warlord. He was a master of the art of war, a giant among his foes. Though O'Donnell's team tried every tactic they could think of, their efforts seemed insignificant against Caratha's overwhelming power. O'Donnell, attempting to distract Carath, executed quick maneuvers while his soldiers launched parallel attacks to break through Caratha's defenses. For a brief moment, Caratha's eye caught sight of a soldier trying to plant an explosive device on his armor. The warlord paused and, with lightning speed, lunged at the soldier. His sword flashed in the air, but O'Donnell pulled the soldier aside just in time to avoid the deadly blow. As Caratha's sword struck the ground, a massive energy burst erupted, sending debris flying in all directions. Dust and smoke rose in the chaos, but Caratha's eyes still glowed with deadly intent. "Is your sword slowing you down, Carath?" O'Donnell taunted with a grim smile. "Let's see how fast you are with these explosives." While O'Donnell engaged the enemy, he gave orders to his team. They moved in circles around Carath, drawing his attention in different directions. Meanwhile, the lieutenant carefully planted the explosives on the weak spots of Caratha's armor. Time was running out. One wrong move could ruin the entire plan. As the lieutenant placed the final explosive, O'Donnell shouted through the radio, "Now, everyone fall back!" The explosives detonated in a series of massive explosions. Caratha's armor glowed red-hot, and sparks flew in every direction. The enormous warlord staggered for a moment, then dropped to his knees with a thunderous roar. But it wasn't over yet. Though severely wounded by the explosions, Carath was still alive. O'Donnell didn't look victorious. When he saw Carath rise again, his face filled with disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered to himself. "How did those explosives not finish him off?" Carath took a deep breath and stood, though barely. His armor was shattered, but there was still a spark of energy within him. "You are so weak," he rasped, forcing his battered body to stand tall. "I will conquer this galaxy." O'Donnell knew this was his last chance. He turned to his soldiers, resolve flashing in his eyes. "When this is over, Carath won't rise again." Despite his weakened state, Carath remained a dangerous foe. O'Donnell and his team gathered their strength for one final assault. Carath raised his sword one last time, preparing to strike O'Donnell down, but just then the lieutenant made one last desperate move, throwing all his remaining energy explosives directly at Caratha's chest. The explosives lodged themselves near Caratha's heart, and within seconds a massive blast tore through the air, completely annihilating the warlord. As the smoke and dust settled, Caratha's massive body lay motionless. O'Donnell slowly emerged from the cloud of debris, breathing heavily as the weight of victory sank in. "It's over," he said with a deep breath. "We've finally rid the galaxy of this monster." From the orbiting ship, Varro had been watching the battle's conclusion. He sent a message to the ground below. "O'Donnell, you've done a magnificent job. Caratha's reign has ended. But this may only be the beginning." With Carath defeated, the dark sky over Revelus began to lighten. O'Donnell and his team had survived one of the toughest battles yet, but they knew other warlords across the galaxy would soon be forced to recognize the Federation's justice. "This is just one victory," Varro said, addressing the team from the bridge. "But for true justice to prevail across the galaxy, we have many more battles ahead. The Federation's light will shine across the entire galaxy." As O'Donnell and his team returned to the ship, a heavy silence hung in the air. The scars of war were visible on all of them, but deep inside, a flicker of hope remained. Caratha's fall signaled the dawn of a new era. The Human Federation had vowed to bring peace and justice to the galaxy, but it was clear that many challenges still awaited them on this path. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.